You know, when you're at a club or maybe you're at a concert and everybody is just dancing and having a lot of fun. So you feel like you can dance because, of course, nobody's going to think you're weird if you start dancing. Or maybe you're not the one dancing and everyone else is dancing. And now you feel like you are the odd one out because you're like, oh my God, I'm not dancing. I should probably start dancing. It's kind of like you're conforming to the world around you. You're like, I got to start dancing. Or maybe it's a song you need to sing and you're just all having fun. That is something we're going to be talking about today. In July of 1518, there was this woman. Her name was Frau Tofia. I don't even know if I'm saying her name right. She was from France, so I'm so sorry if I'm saying her name wrong. But she would step onto the cobble streets right outside her house and she would just begin to dance. Eventually, people started to notice this and they thought it was weird. But then suddenly, more and more people started to dance, but they didn't really want to dance. They were wanting it to stop. It was literally like they caught the dancing plague. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. But first, I want to welcome you to the Decomposing Flower podcast. In this podcast, we talk about all sorts of different things, whether it's true crime or things we just find interesting. I'm with Kira. Now, all of our information is found online, but this is such an old case. It's from the 1500s. So, of course, some information might not be exactly accurate. I did try to go through multiple sources and see, but of course, with a case so old, it can be a little bit iffy on what is true. So, like I said, in July, there was this woman and she began to dance. She would actually dance until she would collapse from exhaustion, and then she'd kind of rest up and she'd begin dancing again. Within a week, 30 more people would join in and start to dance with her. And they would all dance too until they would fall from exhaustion or their feet would start to bleed, and some of them even died. When the authorities started to notice a lot of people dancing and, not doing what they should be doing, they would actually go to the civic and the religious leaders and ask how we should stop this. So these leaders pretty much assumed that this was just something they just need to get out of their system. Why don't we just have them play some music and get it out? So they actually would hire musicians and professional dancers, and they arranged a guild hall for the dancers so they could all get out of their system. But this did the exact opposite. This would actually spiral into hundreds of people dancing. The dancing was more like convulsing. It wasn't like they were line dancing or doing like the hokey pokey. They were thrashing around with their arms all over the place. Their eyes were vacant with no expression. They were covered in sweat. Sometimes they were bleeding and they would cry for help, asking for this to stop, but they just could not get it to stop until they would, of course, either die or just fall from exhaustion. Roughly around 14 people had died a day, but it's not exactly sure if this is true because in one of my sources it said that this isn't as accurate because a lot of the deaths were not actually recorded. So take that as you will. Dancing would soon be banned, and same thing with music, so you couldn't even do that. Even if you were able to stop, you just were not allowed because they believed that people were just catching this plague just from dancing. Now, a lot of people would theorize that this was a demonic possession or that people were being punished for their sins. And so people would kind of notice this and they'd be like, oh shit, I don't want to be punished for my sins. Maybe I need to also dance. So people would just join in out of this fear of punishment. This is actually known as a nocebo effect, which can have people believe they are sick by simply being told they should be sick or that they should feel a certain way. For example, if I came up to you and told you, please don't be mad, or you're going to be mad, or don't be offended, you might be offended. Even if I tell you something, you might not actually be offended, but you might end up being offended because I told you not to be offended. It's kind of the same thing where these people were told that they needed to dance or they believed they needed to dance for their sins. And so that's why they would begin to dance their sins away. And of course, this is the 1500s, so everything is religious and religion holds such a strong hold on everyone. Sin is everyone's biggest threat. And it seemed that a lot of people thought that they needed to be forgiven for their sins in order to stop the dancing. So when someone would begin dancing, they would actually be hauled up to a mountain where they would be holding on a cross and they would have holy water sprinkled on them. And then they would be told to dance in front of a shrine known as the Shrine of Saint Vitus, who was a martyr. So after they would dance and they would do this in front of the shrine, they would be told that they were forgiven by Vitus, and this was now the cure because they would stop dancing. And by early September, this entire mania would actually stop. So this only lasted for about a month and a half or maybe almost 2 months. But basically, once they were brought up to the mountain and they were forgiven for their sins, they would stop dancing. This wasn't actually the first time this has happened in history. There was a time where in 11th century in what is now Germany, where a lot of people believed that convulsing was a sign of a punishment from the divine, and so they would have to do the same thing. There was also a time in Italy in the 15th century where a woman was bit by a spider and she began to convulse, and it seemed that the only way to cure this was to dance with the right music, which was a really well-known and accepted cure. To this very day, we actually do not know what happened during the dancing plague, but we do have some theories. So, one of the very first theories was in the 20th century when investigators started to research this, and they assumed that it stemmed from a bread made from rye flour contaminated with fungal disease ergot, which has been known to produce convulsions and is associated and related with LSD. And interesting enough, this fungus is also implicated around with the Salem witch trials, which, if you guys are curious about us talking about that, please let us know in the comments. Now, John Waller, who is an American medical historian, he doesn't really believe this theory because it wouldn't really make sense for a lot of people to be dancing for that long if it was just a fungus, if it was something like LSD, like if they're just tripping. And on top of it, they wouldn't all be reacting the same way, but everyone was reacting the same way and they were being healed the same way. So, for example, like if you and I were about to just, maybe we were going to take some shrooms, we might react in a completely different way. You might have an amazing trip and I might have a bad trip. You're not going to react the same way, even though you might have similarities, but not entirely the same way. Which is kind of why John Waller, his main theory is mass hysteria, which I think makes the most amount of sense. So, mass hysteria can happen for multiple reasons, such as stress, which a lot of people at the time were undergoing a shit ton of stress, whether it was diseases or famines or making sure you don't do the wrong thing in public. They were under a shit ton of stress, but they also were superstitious. And stress can induce psychosis, which most likely is what happened to these people. They were in some sort of psychosis, believing that maybe they were demonic, or maybe they needed to cure their sins, or maybe they just were in some kind of group psychosis. Or maybe it's just the nocebo effect where they believe that they were needing to be cured and that they were sinners. And so maybe that's exactly what happened. But it's still unclear exactly what happened. To me, that seems like the most viable explanation because I mean, when I look back at COVID, I mean, COVID is still around today, but in the extreme days of COVID, I remember a lot of people were getting sick, and I remember myself getting sick, and I thought I had COVID. And then I never even had COVID. It was like I convinced myself I did, and then I would get tested and I didn't have it, and all of a sudden I'm fine once I found out I didn't have it. So it's almost like your brain is just crazy and it tricks you and it likes to be weird. But yeah, honestly, we have no idea exactly what happened, but I am curious to know what everyone thinks in the comments below. What do you know? Did I get any information wrong on this, or do you have any other theories? We would love to hear that. But again, thank you so much for watching or listening to this podcast, and we will see you guys next week.